Welcome along to the second part in my 4-part adult ADHD survival guide. In this video, we're going to talk about the actual ADHD diagnosis process, how to begin, what to expect, and what kind of possible outcomes you can expect. So, you've made the big decision to get yourself properly assessed by a mental health care professional. Good on you, as they say here in Oz, or nice one geezer, as they say where I'm from. Obviously, the requirements surrounding a potential ADHD diagnosis varies enormously around the world, and so it's hard to give specific advice on the first steps you should take. Here in Australia, for instance, ADHD can only be diagnosed and medicated for by a clinical psychiatrist, and they won't see you without a referral from your GP. So the first step for me was to convince my doctor that I was worth assessing, and the next step was dealing with a mental health practice to tee up an assessment. This system is pretty similar in many countries around the world, such as the UK and much of Europe. In America, it's a bit simpler and the path to a diagnosis a bit easier. One thing that is common in every country is that you will need to be assessed by a mental health care professional of some kind. Now, let's say you follow the procedure specific to your country and get an appointment with a mental health care professional. What is involved in an assessment and what happens on the day? Firstly, of course, it's fairly normal to be nervous on the day of your assessment. I'm not going to lie. I was shitting bricks because it was a really big deal for me. But any healthcare professional will be used to this, and the fact that you're nervous actually lends credence to your cause because it shows you're fully invested in the process. When it comes to the actual assessment, the process is surprisingly similar all around the world, although the complexity of the assessment does vary. For example, in France, they take a much more holistic approach to an ADHD assessment, mainly because they incorrectly treat it as a sociological disorder rather than one based around the physical differences in the brain. Some countries require several appointments and background checks with close family, close friends, and others who are familiar with you. Most assessments comprise a written element and an interview element. The written element is often in a multiple choice format, and one of the most common tests is called the Wender-Utah rating. This is a kind of adult ADHD pop quiz, not dissimilar to the free tests you'll find online. Each question begins with "as a child I was," and then 3 pages of emotions and behaviour such as afraid of things or hot or short-tempered. You then have to pick a number from 0 to 4, ranging from not at all to very much. It's obviously ludicrously easy to see where the questions are leading, and not, in my opinion, a very accurate test. After all, if you wanted to land yourself a positive ADHD diagnosis and you were asked if, as a child, you were inattentive and daydreaming, you'd say very much, wouldn't you? Duh. Still, I guess until they can test us with a blood sample, this is a sort of metric that will just have to do. Along with the pop quiz test, you'll probably be asked to get someone who knows you well to answer an adult observer questionnaire. This has questions in a similar format to the Wender-Utah, but instead of simpler, primarily emotion-based questions, it asks things like, how often does this person have problems remembering appointments or obligations? Or how often does this person make careless mistakes when they have to work on a boring or difficult project? In addition to the multiple choice and adult observer tests, you will also have an appointment with an appropriately qualified mental health care professional. The person I saw for my original ADHD assessment was a professor at the local university, and like all official ADHD assessors here in Australia, a clinical psychiatrist. I had a 1-hour sit-down interview with my shrink in which he looked at my written results and asked me questions about my childhood and adult life. For pretty much every ADHD assessment in every country, the key to getting diagnosed with ADHD as an adult is to show that you had it as a child and that you've always been this way. If your life is a train wreck like mine, with a history of crime, a litany of failed jobs and relationships, substance abuse, alcoholism, depression, and obesity, then let me tell you, you don't need to fake it. The truth, as they say, will out. The professor put me out of my misery on the day of my appointment and basically said I was like the poster child for adult ADHD. Perhaps it was the fact that in the middle of replying to a question, I asked him about the model boat he was halfway through repairing, and then talked over the top of him when he was telling me about it. Before I left that first assessment, I was prescribed some non-stimulant pills by my shrink. This was disappointing because I was hoping to get straight onto the good stuff, but you have to play the game, don't you? So, assuming that your shrink ticked the right boxes and you've been officially diagnosed, be ready to feel some emotions. The way that adults react to a positive ADHD diagnosis is as varied as the way the disorder presents in us. Some people immediately sink into a deep depression at the thought of all the fuck-ups and missed opportunities in their life that they previously thought was just down to them being a lousy human. Some calmly accept it all and move on with their lives. Some get really fucking angry. Personally, I felt pure elation. I had an answer. I wasn't an irredeemable wanker. I was a redeemable wanker. If I have any advice on this subject, it's to have someone you know well close at hand so you can unload a few emotions. If they can be there with you in person, all the better, but having them on speed dial is nearly as good. I phoned my missus and then drove home with a huge fucking smile on my dial. There is always the possibility, of course, that the mental health care professional you see does not believe you have ADHD. It happens. I remember talking about my ADHD to an acquaintance who became convinced that they had it too. So they got referred, got an appointment with a shrink, were assessed, and the shrink said they didn't have it. It's easy to get immersed in the ADHD scene, for want of a better word, and to convince yourself that you have it. Getting a knockback from your mental health care professional will be a kick in the balls, or the female equivalent, but you do have a couple of options. Firstly, you can accept it and investigate other possibilities, maybe high sugar diets making you this way, or maybe you're just a prick. No judgment here. Secondly, you can get a second opinion. This is, of course, an expensive option, but until we get the aforementioned mythical blood test for ADHD, diagnosis depends entirely on the person assessing you. Maybe they got it wrong and the next one you see will decide you do have ADHD. If it counts for anything, if I'd got knocked back by my shrink, I would definitely have rolled the dice again and seen someone else. And that'll do us for this second video in my Adult ADHD Survival Guide series. In the next video, take a look at the immediate post-diagnosis phase and what to expect.